You're listening to Life of the Record, classic albums told by the people who made them. My name is Dan Nordheim. Japandroids formed in 2006 in Vancouver, British Columbia by Brian King and David Prowse. After self-releasing 2 EPs, they turned their attention to their debut full-length album. Post Nothing was released in 2009 by Unfamiliar Records and was an unexpected success. They signed to Polyvinyl and began recording their second album in between tours. Celebration Rock was eventually released in 2012. In this episode, for the 10th anniversary, David Prowse, engineer Jesse Gander, and writer Stephen Hyden look back on how the album came together. This is the making of Celebration Rock.
My name's Stephen Hyden. I'm an author and music critic, and I'm here to talk about Celebration Rock. For me, the significance of the title Celebration Rock was celebrating what rock and roll can be. And that just felt like such a refreshing message in 2012, because it really was a time like where it was almost like people cheering for rock and roll to be dead. You know, that was my feeling, because you always read these think pieces about, rock music is irrelevant, rock is dead, no one cares about it, the kids don't like it anymore, yada, yada, yada. And it just seemed like so many people were predicting the end of rock and almost like wanting to will it into existence. So to see a band just come out and say, we're celebrating this music, we're celebrating rock and roll, we're celebrating its history, its lineage, we're making a record that is drawn from this continuum and we want to add to it, and we're doing this in the most straightforward, earnest way possible. I just found that to be like so inspiring. It was almost like they could only get away with that because they were so outside the indie rock world. To me, the magic of the album is the sort of ordinariness of this band and how they were able to make this transcendent record because they just believed in rock music that much. Like it really is sort of it's like this heartwarming sort of miracle type story.
Hey, this is Dave from Japandroids, and we are talking about the 2012 album Celebration Rock. So Japandroids were, and to some extent still are, based in Vancouver, BC, Canada, which is a bit of a hinterland culturally, even within Canada, let alone worldwide. So we're not completely off the map, but we're not one of the big cities that everybody's looking to for, what's what in terms of art, music, culture. So we did our thing in Vancouver. We were getting a little bit of buzz locally, but there was a feeling that things were pretty stagnant. It was pretty common amongst our peer group for people to make a couple records, maybe get a little buzz locally, but not really go anywhere. And then maybe you move to Montreal or you move to Toronto, or maybe you just start a new band in Vancouver. So we were sort of hitting that moment after we made Post Nothing. Brian and I were both quite ambitious, and I had no problem just harassing anybody I knew who put out records. And I literally couldn't get anyone in Vancouver to put out our stuff. It was pretty demoralizing, and we knew we had a cool album that we were really proud of. I think Post Nothing we tracked in like 3 days, and then I think maybe we had one more day for vocals. Jesse Gander, wonderful local recording engineer, he recorded it, he mixed it.
My name's Jesse Gander, and I'm a recording engineer and producer in Vancouver, British Columbia. And yeah, I recorded most of the Japandroids records out there, including Celebration Rock. I first met Japandroids when they were a brand new band. You know, they put on the show, just a DIY punk rock show kind of thing. And I remember they played first, and I thought they totally rocked. And I clearly remember it going through my head like, man, this is totally like the kind of punk rock that I love. But this is never going to be popular with the kids, you know, like thinking in those days, everybody wanted to be like Joy Division. You know, it was all about how dark can you make it? How British can you be? That's what was really popular in Canada at that time. So I remember thinking, no one's going to go for this, you know, Husker Du, barn burning, punk rock. Like, I don't think anybody's ever going to dig this. You know, it's just kind of a passing thought. And, but I really, really liked it. It was something that I immediately connected with and super loved the band right away. Yeah. So then when they called me to start recording them, which was, I guess, for Post Nothing, you know, it was a quick record. It was done in 2 days. I mean, I don't think they were thinking like, hey, let's drop $1,000 to make a big record that's going to be, you know, potentially change the course of our lives forever. I don't think that's what they were thinking. They were a band that jammed a couple nights a week and played a few shows.
We had a very kind of interesting series of events leading to us playing a show to basically no one at a festival in Montreal called Pop Montreal. Later, we found out that a contributor to Pitchfork was at that show among the like 12 people there, and we got a MySpace message. So this is really setting the place and time. We got a MySpace message in 2009 from Mark Richardson at Pitchfork, and you could literally see as soon as he basically asked, can we put Young Heart Spark Fire on our website? And we said, yeah, of course you can. Please do. And then as soon as that happened, you know, just the amount of listeners on our MySpace page and followers and whatnot, like just exponentially grew. And also, like, I think in 2022, it's hard for people to understand the sort of cachet and power that Pitchfork had in 2009. You know, they were definitely the kind of taste-making website, you know, that existed in music and really could kind of like crown people. So that really kind of kicked things off in terms of just getting any recognition whatsoever.
Japandroids really weren't, to my perspective of it, weren't even really a popular local band yet in Vancouver. Like they were, like I don't even think they were really quite at the size where they were headlining clubs in Vancouver yet. It would have been a shock to us all that people gravitated so much towards the record and the press was so like favorable to it. I think it was refreshing to people, and I think it was cool, and it came up at a time that maybe people were ready for that.
They had that sort of loser allure that the replacements had, you know, that these guys are not meant to be famous, really. They're not meant to be praised on Pitchfork. You know, it's sort of like the last band that you would expect to be getting good reviews from music critics. And yet, because they just have so much like joy and celebration in the music, it just like won people over. And there was just something like really appealing about that, you know, and it's hard to imagine that kind of record taking over the imagination of like the indie rock press today, you know, like a band like that, you know, isn't well connected, that isn't making what is considered, you know, sort of trendy music or, you know, forward-thinking music, you know, really just sort of like an old school rock band made up of like two misfits, you know, that somehow kind of takes over the world, or at least its corner of the world.
We had a very weird history to our band where we kind of constantly felt like the band was sort of on borrowed time because we'd already given up on the band and then all this stuff happened. And then we just kind of rolled with it and ended up touring on Post Nothing for about a year and a half.
They were just such a hard working touring band. Like they were just literally on tour all the time. And, you know, when you're a band like that, you really have to strike while the iron's hot. Like when the tours are being offered to you and the press is being favorable to you and you have the energy and the will to tour lots and do that, you must.
It was a very weird feeling going into making Celebration Rock because, you know, we'd sort of given up on the band, then all the success had happened, and then, you know, we'd sort of just run ourselves into the ground, just saying yes to every opportunity we've been given as far as where to play and what to do. And then all of a sudden it was time to make a new record.
Long lit up tonight and still drinking. Don't we have anything to live for? Well, of course we do, but till they come true, we're drinking and we're still smoking. Don't we have anything to live for? Well, of course we do, but till they come true, we're smoking.
I think when people listen to Celebration Rock, they think we were having a lot of fun in the studio, and that is not really the case. There was occasionally moments where it was a good time, but I think actually, strangely enough, it's a record that came out of a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure, self-inflicted pressure.
They were basically like, coming home for 2 weeks in between 2-month-long tours and try to write 2 songs or 1 song or something like that. Just try to have something and a cover usually just for fun. And they were actually banging off what we kind of almost thought were going to be 7 inches. So some of the songs in Celebration Rock, they were almost kind of one-offs in a way. But as time went on and the touring just didn't stop and they needed a new album, a few years had passed now, like of them just touring nonstop. And they were really like, hey, like, probably also the record labels were like, yo, you guys need a proper full length. We can't just go on 7 inches forever. We need an LP.
It was pretty like serious business making the record. And there was definitely a lot of moments where it felt like the record wasn't going to get finished, or there was definitely some moments where we felt pretty lost and unsure of what to do next. So there was a pretty strong desire for both of us to prove that we weren't just some one-hit wonder. So we definitely put a lot of pressure on ourselves and really pushed ourselves to try and make a record that we were really proud of and felt like a clear evolution from what we'd done previously.
I think Celebration Rock is a pretty massive step forward, and the songs as well. Like the songs are, lyrically are way more developed, and I think it is a massive step up. And even though we did those, like Celebration Rock was also done in 2 days, it was done in 2 songs in 2-day chunks, not 10 songs in 2 days.
It was very, very different from Post Nothing. Post Nothing was pretty much like, let's grab a case of beer and a case of Red Bull and go into the studio and just like let it rip. And there was a bit of that for Celebration Rock, but also a lot of moments where we would start doing things and then take a minute and be like, is this what we want to do? And then, scrap a song or add a new song or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's definitely a lot more labor intensive than Post Nothing certainly was. And I think the biggest thing you notice is just that Brian is trying to say a lot more. There were little hints of that, I think, on Post Nothing, but there were also a bunch of songs that had like 2 lines for the entire song.
So when Celebration Rock dropped, it was a real surprise because not only was it a great record, but it came from this band that didn't seem to have the makings to produce an album like that. It really was an example of them not coming out of nowhere, but, really transforming themselves, I think, into something that felt really special. I think that was the double shock of that album. Just the fact that it was so good and that Japandroids made it.
We all wanna know, but nobody knows. Was the nights of wine and roses hold for the wine and roses of our souls? So we down our drinks in a bottle of red as we burn our flames right down to the end. We don't cry for those nights to arrive. We out like hell in the heavens.
So The Nights of Wine and Roses is one of the songs that took probably the longest to go from start to finish. For a long, long time, it was an instrumental that we really liked, and we had a nickname for it. We called it Springsteen. We called it the Springsteen song for a long time. I think I think probably just because it was like a bit slower than some of our other stuff, but felt very, very anthemic and kind of had like almost like a Born in the USA vibe or something like that to us. But as much as we loved the instrumental, we just couldn't really figure out how to turn it into like a song. I actually was sort of in charge of writing the lyrics to that one for a long time, and I just never really could come up with anything that felt quite right. And so when Brian took a crack at it, he basically had those lyrics down. And then the thing that really clinched that song to me is that sort of wordless bridge section, you know, because it's yell like hell to the heavens. And then, oh, you know, that part comes in. And I feel like once that part of the song entered into it, it just took on a whole other life. And that's a really, really fun song to play live. And yeah, it was just definitely one of those eureka moments where as soon as Brian had that idea, that song just was like, oh, this is going to be a good one for sure. This is a banger to start the record with.
Nights of Wine and Roses is just such a quintessential opening track. And I think it speaks to the rock scholarship of this band that, you know, if you're going to make a record like this, you need a Thunder Road. You need a Black Dog. You know, you need a sort of lapels grabbing opening track that's really going to set the tone. And, you know, I love the fireworks at the beginning of the song, you know, which I feel like that's such a transportive moment, putting the listener in a headspace where you're going back to a younger, more innocent time in your life.
They've just been touring the States, I think. And I don't know if you know, but in Canada, firecrackers are illegal. You cannot buy them here. You're not allowed to buy fucking gunpowder. Like, it's not like a thing you can just go and buy. And in Canada, you'd have to buy those on the black market usually. And people, like, literally in high school, like delinquents would go across the border to Bellingham or you know, or Blaine or one of the close American border towns to Vancouver and buy the firecrackers and smuggle them back and sell them to the kids. And we'd, like, you know, blow shit up or empty out all the gunpowder into and put it all into one, you know, capsule, so it, like, makes a bigger bang. Anyways, so the guys had brought back a bunch of firecrackers. I'm not sure why.
So yeah, the fireworks. The fireworks are real. It's firecrackers. Brian and I are both big fans of firecrackers, and we'd actually tried to record firecrackers in an earlier recording session for an EP, like way back in the day. We often, especially back in those days, would have a pretty good cache of firecrackers on us whenever we go on tour. And America obviously is a land that loves their firecrackers much more than Canada. So we would always hit up these, like, giant firecracker warehouses in like, especially in the Midwest. I feel like they have tons of those. So we just always had a cache of firecrackers. So we had that idea in the past. We wanted to do it again. So we did it just in the back parking lot, basically where you load into the studio. It's all concrete. So there's a lot of, like, interesting reflections. And so Jesse just brought out a boom mic.
We blew up a whole pack of Mighty Mites, you know, or boomers, or one of those, you know, multiple packs of firecrackers that you light one and, you know, 100 blow up. And we put mics outside and we mic'd that up, and it didn't really sound like much. So then I had the idea, let's just slow them right down. Like in Pro Tools, you can just slow down a sound. And the pitch will also slow down. And when we slowed it right down and expanded the width of that track by, you know, 1,000% or something like that, all of a sudden it just sounded like fireworks blowing off. And we're like, oh my God, it's so cool.
The real sound would have been more like pop, 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 but instead it's like that boom, 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 boom. You know, it's just, and that's just from the tape effect. It sounded pretty rad. It definitely came out better than I think any one of us thought it was going to sound. So big credit to Jesse for making that sound as good as it did. It was sort of just a goofy idea that we had, and then as soon as we heard it, we were like, oh, this is going to be great. We should definitely have the album start and finish with these.
Drinks in a funnel of friends, and we burn our plans right down to the
I think what Japandroids did, it's so simple and so direct that it's actually really hard to do. Like the musicianship of it isn't complicated. The songwriting, is pretty straightforward. So anyone can technically do it. You can technically pull off these songs. Any band could do that. But in terms of getting them over, performing them, selling them, it really does require, I think, a high level of commitment and like a total lack of guile. Like if you are singing a song like Nights of Wine and Roses, which is, a song, it's like a drinking song, basically. It's a song, let's stay up all night and let's party. And if you do a song like that, and there's even a tinge of irony, or there's a tinge of self-consciousness or embarrassment, or, sort of like a cool guy posture with that, I think it just falls apart. It points out the ridiculousness of a song like that. But if it's someone who is expressing something honest and true and emotional, it stops being ridiculous, and it becomes something that's almost like a memory. And really, like for people who don't like this record, I think that's the thing that holds them back from it, because you kind of have to be as guileless as Japandroids are to get into this album. If you approach any of this stuff cynically, the album falls apart, I think. And that's something that not every listener is going to be able to do, to go all in the same way that the band is.
I think Fire's Highway was actually the first song that we wrote for Celebration Rock that was finished. I mean, Younger Us obviously had come out well before that, but that song was, initially was going to be a single. And Fire's Highway was written for the record and was done pretty early in the writing process, and was something that we were really, really happy with. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great example of one of the things I like most about Brian's guitar playing, which is that, being able to basically play chords underneath like a lead guitar line, and I just love that way that Brian can play. And I think as soon as I heard that riff, I was pretty locked in, and that song felt like it came together pretty quickly, and was a song we were really, really, really happy with. It was definitely one of those moments where once we had that song under our belts, I feel like we knew we were onto something, and it helped spur on the rest of the writing for this record.
Northern soul and southern lands will always find his way to southern hands. She'll kiss away your gypsy fears and turn some restless nights to restless years. Hearts from hell collide on Fire's Highway tonight. We dreamed and now we know.
I'm pretty sure that Fire's Highway and I think Evil Sway, to me, those ones are kind of some of the most barn-burning kind of songs on the record. Like Fire's Highway is a ripper of a song. I'm pretty sure that those were recorded in the summer. Like I think that they had a very narrow window on tour, and it was like, again, this album was mixed in the winter. And I think those songs, like they're kind of fast, like ripper songs, because I think they were just in that state of mind. They were just touring full blast. And I think Fire's Highway is probably kind of a reflection of that. Yeah, to me, that was always like, this is a song inspired by being on tour endlessly, and I think the narrative of the song probably captures a bit of that.
Post Nothing, a lot of the lyrical themes are pretty autobiographical, where it's, about that feeling of being stuck and wanting to leave somewhere. And, Celebration Rock, across the record, there's definitely a lot of stories about getting out and sort of all the different things you get up to once you're able to sort of escape your hometown and travel all over the world. And so Fire's Highway is a pretty great example of that. It's definitely a road trip song, and yeah, captures that kind of spirit of just like wild nights on the road.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like Fire's Highway is really plugging into that idea of like the open road and going out into the world, which is like such a great like rock and roll subject, because rock and roll is about transformation, like changing your life for the better and breaking free of, whatever was holding you back.
I think it's in some ways like one of the most emblematic songs for like the spirit of the record as a whole, and even for the band as a whole. I think a lot of people think of those kind of concepts when they think of the band. They think of seizing the day and making the most of the time you have.
A soul of fire and eyes of flame tend to overwhelm her tender frame. And when raw winds blew us down her city streets, she warmed my body with her spirit's heat. Some empty bottles the cold sweat brews, howling like outlaws from her rented room. No rising sun confession gear, only a restless night I'll nurse for years.
I mean, just the title, Fire's Highway, I mean, it evokes things like Thunder Road, like that sort of like 50s, youthsploitation type title, like you could imagine like James Dean being in a movie called Fire's Highway, where he's playing like a bad boy drag racer, something like that. So, I think with Japandroids, their lyrics are definitely, they're heightened melodrama, like they're definitely writing in the same way that Springsteen did on Born to Run, where there are elements of autobiography, but it's heightened, and it's cut through the language and the iconography of like old time rock music. And it's, acknowledging the cliches of that, but also celebrating it and realizing that you can utilize those cliches in the service of, expressing something that's emotionally authentic.
So Evil Sway is a weird one. We actually, for a long time, I think just because we recorded that song first, and when we recorded it, we were thinking it was going to be a single, we were constantly thinking that was going to be the first single on the record. To the point where, like, even when we sent in that finished album and Polyvinyl first heard it, and, our publicist first heard it, and, like, our manager and all these people, we were like, oh, here's the record. Evil Sway is going to be the first single. And, we just had it so fixed in our minds. So eventually, a bunch of people were like, hey guys, there's this song called House That Heaven Built that I think you should probably make the single. And obviously we listened to them, and it seems crazy now to think that we didn't think that House That Heaven Built was the single, but just in our minds, we were just totally locked on Evil Sway being the single. Again, like with lyrics, obviously Evil Sway, there's a little bit of a nod to the Stones, and then the other thing I always think about is, he says, all I see is sexual red, which, like, every time I hear sexual red, I think of Gun Club, because that's a line Jeffrey Lee Pierce has. Our band is sort of this sweet spot where obviously we really love these like giant kind of populist anthems. We love all those classic rock influences. As much as we love Gun Club and Dream Syndicate, we also, love Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty. Brian definitely was like nodding to all these different influences like throughout the record, just little moments here and there, this kind of little Easter eggs.
I mean, I think the appeal of Celebration Rock is that these two guys had clearly studied rock history, and they were making an album in the mold of, of a Born to Run or a Marquee Moon or Led Zeppelin 4. It had the feeling of like a classic rock record, but like they were not a classic rock band. They're coming at it from a distance in a way. They don't look like a typical rock band. It's a guitar player and a drummer. They were clearly drawing from the continuum of rock music, but they were doing it in a way that really no other band had done, and it was almost like deconstructing what classic rock was and putting it together in like a slightly sort of eccentric shape that still delivered the goods, in a way that you would want from a record like that.
Brian and I, especially, in the kind of decade leading up to Celebration Rock, we were listening to a lot of the same music together, mainly because we would be hanging out all the time. So Brian especially is just devours music constantly and is just like ingesting it all and then sharing stuff with me. So he has like a pretty encyclopedic knowledge of like rock and roll. You're talking to the drummer, so one of the things I think about most with Evil Sway was that there is a drum solo. That was Brian's idea. I came to drumming pretty late, and so I wasn't necessarily thinking that I had the skill set to provide a drum solo for a song. Nor did we ever seem to be like the kind of band that would have a drum solo, but it was pretty fun to do, and it was definitely a fun thing to do live.
It almost feels like a 50s record at times on the first side. It really feels like Japandroids kind of leaning into rock history in sort of like an old-time rock and roll direction. And I think that's worth emphasizing. I think that translates in like the sound of the songs, but also in the imagery. I mean, it just reminds me a lot of the sort of like more, doom and gloom type early rock songs. It has like a slightly kind of gothic feel to me a little bit, like on that side of the record, which I think is like pretty cool.
We've done a whole slew of singles between Post Nothing and Celebration Rock. And with each one of those singles, we do a B-side cover. And I think usually in the way we chose those B-sides, we'd often be exploring darker material than we would sort of let ourselves write, on our own. And I think it helped us broaden our horizons. So, there's a Big Black cover that we did. We did a cover of Jack the Ripper by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. We covered PJ Harvey. We covered X. And so that Gun Club cover was originally, planned as one of those B-sides.
We kind of not had a great weekend. Like, I think we had a weekend where the original song they'd written hadn't gone down quite as well as they'd hoped. I think Brian was starting to doubt the quality of the song, which again, I think got rewritten and re-recorded and included on Celebration Rock in the end. But meanwhile, we kind of got to the end of the weekend and we were like, fuck, we kind of didn't meet our goals this weekend, or we weren't really happy with what we'd done. And I think we were probably drinking at the time, or I mean, I don't think I was, but bet you they were. I normally don't drink much at work, but I think it was kind of like we were feeling bummed, and we're like, let's just do something fun. Let's do something exciting. So I had the idea of being like, let's just create a crazy vocal sound. It's not an easy song to sing either, because you have to do your best Jeffrey Lee Pierce, and he's a pretty fucking crazy guy and whatever. So I think what I did is I hooked up the vocals and I ran them through some different like distorted like tube mic pre's, and I ran them through the space echo, and I literally like came up with a vocal sound that was totally mixed. And I think Brian had a few at that moment in time and was probably getting tired already. And it was like, just like, go in there and fucking bang something out. Just like go in there and rip a song off. Let's not punch in. Let's not get granular. Let's not get in our heads about it. Let's just like go in, have some fun, and crank it out.
I remember distinctly Jesse just handing Brian a bottle of Jack Daniels and like a 58, just like a cordless 58, and turning the lights out in the main tracking room, and just being like, take a few pulls off the Jack Daniels and just let it rip. And that's how we got the vocal for that. I would definitely not recommend that as the way to get all your vocals for a record, but it did definitely work for that one.
And he did that vocal for the Love of Ivy, which I think he did a great job on, and is totally exciting. And then it was like, okay, we're done. This weekend was a bit shit, but we got one rad thing out of it.
I think one of Jesse's big strong suits for us is that he's quite a talented singer, and he's a really great coach for vocals. And I think one of the things that I really notice, especially listening back to Celebration Rock, is just remembering like Brian was not a confident singer at that time. He's gotten a lot more confident as a lyricist and as a singer as the band's gone on. But when we first started, vocals was not a source of confidence, and Jesse really knew how to bring the best out of Brian vocally. And some of the performances he got out of Brian on Celebration Rock are pretty incredible.
I'm a steel driver, man, I wanna go.
That was a really fun cover to record, and it also became like a live set staple for us after that. So obviously our band really loves dynamics. Like we like, being super loud and then trying to stop for a minute, or bring things down for a second, then explode again. And the Gun Club are so good at that.
To cover a Gun Club song in 2012, that just was not something that I think a lot of indie groups were interested in 2012. It was just like a reference that, like a lot of things on this record, it was sort of like a passé thing, to sound like that. And again, I think it just speaks to how isolated this band was, how they were not part of any kind of scene, and it didn't seem like they wanted to fit in. When you think about like indie rock as it was in 2012, it was an interesting year because there was a transition going on, I think, from what was going on in the late aughts, which was a very arty type of indie rock that was coming out of Brooklyn, exemplified by groups like Animal Collective and Grizzly Bear and Dirty Projectors, who were drawing from like folk music, but also like a lot of like pop and R&B and dance music. Really like not much of a rock thing going on at all. So when you listen to this record in that context and you remember like what else is going on, I think it stands out even more.
Honestly, that song sticks out like a sore thumb on the record to me, and to Brian too. I think that is one weird thing about the record that actually irks us. Not that we love that song and we love the Gun Club, but I think if we could do it all over again, we'd probably try and stick one more original that felt like it fit with the rest of the record a little better. There was a lot of ways to sort of talk ourselves into including it on the album, especially when you had 7 songs and you really wanted to have an 8-song album. But it's a weird one. to listen back to, because it kind of feels like it sort of belongs in a different world.
Yeah, obviously, like putting a cover on a record, I get why the band regrets that, and like I said, there was, this was like a situation where like we have to go back on tour like in a week from now, like we have to wrap this up. We need a song, and it's a good thing that it was pretty rad because it ended up being needed to make an 8-song record. Otherwise, we would have had a 7-song record. So,
well, it's interesting to me because I feel like the record is somewhat backloaded. The first side in a way feels like the opening act, and the second side is like the headliner.
So Adrenaline Night Shift is one of my favorite songs that we've ever done. And it was often a set opener on the whole Celebration Rock tour. It's got a bit of a like Born to Run kind of vibe or something where you're really like coming in all guns blazing. And it felt like a great way to start either side A or side B of the record. And I think when we were messing around with track listings, that was one of the things to me that kind of kept bouncing around was, there was a moment of thinking Adrenaline Night Shift should maybe start the record. But if it didn't start the record, it should at least start side B. Yeah, again, it's another autobiographical kind of song, and it has a real Replacements vibe to me, like it's a pretty messy, drunken anthem, like there's a real hook to it, but it's also like kind of sloppy and kind of falling apart at the edges, and I feel like that's a pretty sweet spot for us to hit. And about halfway through making this record, we started recording some songs to a click track, and part of that came from a debate we had about Adrenaline Night Shift, where we'd done a bunch of takes and got this take that we were like, oh, this is sweet, this sounds great. We played it really well. We were like, oh, this is feeling really good, blah blah blah. We'd record together, obviously guitars and drums at the same time, and then Brian would sing and I would sing on top of the instrumental track. As soon as Brian tried to sing over it, he was like, whoa, this is way too fast. We've recorded this way too fast. And Jesse and I were like, no, man, it's good. It's got this whole Born to Run kind of energy. It's great, man. This is perfect. And Brian was like, this is not Born to Run. This is so fast. And I remember we like listened to Adrenaline, and then we listened to Born to Run, and we realized, oh yeah, this is like twice as fast as Born to Run. There's nothing Born to Run about this at all.
When I listen to this record, I hear a band that is trying to sit next to their heroes. Like, it is really just, them making their version of Born to Run as if that's the most natural thing to do in 2012, as if that's something that everybody would be doing, which of course it's not, but their spirit of that and like their directness with that, I think is what really sells the record, to people who love it. I would just go back again to really kind of replugging into a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. And sometimes the only way to like revisit that is through a record. And I think the song Younger Us, like specifically, it's about pining for that, like literally in the lyrics. But I think what makes that song come across is like the sound of it. You know, it sounds like a rush of nostalgia or sentimentality, however you want to describe it. Like, but the way that that song feels, I think, matters more even than like what's in the lyrics. And I think that's true of Japandroid songs in general, that they have a way of plugging into something, you know, like where you hear it and you remember the times in your life when that was your life. You know, when you were young and you were staying up all night for the first time and you were with your friends, and it was something that felt really exhilarating and innocent. And those kind of memories, they're easy to scoff at when you get older and you're more cynical and you feel like you've matured or that you're smarter than you used to be. But I think the great thing about Japandroids is that it really is about the most innocent and maybe the dumbest part of your life. And there's no distance from it at all.
Remember when we had that mall on the run, and the night we saw the midnight sun. Remember saying things like we'll sleep when we're dead, and thinking this feeling was never gonna end.
So Younger Us was actually, it was a non-album single. It came out in spring of 2010, and that song came together very quickly. Brian had been writing it while we were on tour, but I didn't really even hear it until a day or two before we cut it. Brian and I jammed it for 3 days or something.
That was my favorite Japandroid song when they brought it to me. At the time, I'm almost certain that was the first song post Nothing that I recorded. And I remember thinking, that's the best song he ever wrote. Like, that's way better to me than anything on Post Nothing. And that's not to slight Post Nothing. I like songs on that record too. But Younger Us to me is a song, I think very few songs I've ever recorded kind of embody the spirit of how it feels to kind of be young and be out at night and kind of, having personal freedom and falling in love and like everything that could possibly be good about being young. That song is so much about. I love it.
Yeah, I think it inadvertently really showed us a way of growing and seemed to be kind of a pretty natural next step forward, where we're sort of still writing big anthemic songs, but I think we were a bit more confident as musicians. I think Brian was becoming a more confident vocalist. I think we were really kind of crystallizing some of those things that kind of were our strong suits, like those big vocals, gnarly guitar sound, but also very, very melodic guitar playing. And then those dynamics of sort of, coming in with a little bit of a quieter verse and then exploding into the next part. And, Brian singing in that kind of lower octave and then going for that high octave after that. We were 26 writing a song called Younger Us, which now that I'm almost 40 seems ridiculous. But yeah, but I think it's funny, right? I mean, I think that's a funny thing about being younger, I think, is that you can also sometimes have this idea that you're so world weary without really realizing how silly that might sound to an outsider, And I think a lot of people can relate to that too. It's just that feeling of feeling a lot older than your years sometimes.
An underrated aspect of this album is the romance of it. I think there's a certain softness and vulnerability to it. And I don't think that looking back on your childhood or, is exclusive to any one demographic. I mean, I think anyone has a certain sentimentality about their past. I think people tend to classify it as like a dude's rock type album. And, there's certainly elements of that on the record, but, I always feel like that's kind of like a reductive way to dismiss something, that it's just like a bunch of dudes drinking beer and playing loud guitars. And, isn't that special that that's happening? I know quite a few women who like this record because I don't really think of it as like a macho record.
We've managed to find that line where it's sort of music for a wild bros night out, but it's also not in a sort of super toxic way. It's actually just like music for nice dudes to have nice times. I remember somebody telling me they've never seen so many guys like hugging each other as at a Japandroid show. Like there's a sort of warmth, I think, to a lot of the writing. There's an element of like having a wild night out, but there's also kind of a pretty strong like heart behind it.
A song like House That Heaven Built, what strikes me about that song is the softness of it. The softness at the core of that song. That it's expressing something so heartfelt. It really is a song that describes the kind of love that you feel when you're 21.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the nights forgotten and left for
I think it's pretty clear at this point that if there's one song that anybody is ever going to know Japandroids for, it's going to be House That Heaven Built. Brian and I talked a lot about how after Post Nothing, Brian, felt a lot of pressure where he was like, man, I don't know if I'm ever going to write another song that's, that people connect with as much as Young Hearts Spark Fire. Like, I think that might just be the one. If we make 10 more albums, that'll be the song everybody wants to hear. House That Heaven Built obviously has definitely eclipsed that in terms of, just how far it's traveled and how many people have heard it. That was one of the ones that came from the trip to Nashville.
They rented a house for a month and just jammed. They just needed to get away, like no friends, no hanging out. Like we just have to like write the last 4 songs of this record, because if we don't do it when we're away, we're not going to have the time to do it. And that's when they wrote, in particular, The House That Heaven Built was written down there.
We kind of hit a point where things weren't really feeling like they were happening in Vancouver. So a change of scenery just felt like a really good way to just force ourselves to write and focus. So we ended up writing Continuous Thunder and The House I Haven't Built in Nashville. And we have somewhere, I'm sure, I have some very funny phone recordings of like original demos of that from that house in Nashville.
And I got to hear the demos from it. They sent me an email with, whatever, a phone recording or something. Yeah, and I heard that song and was like, you've written the hit. Good job. The song's great. So, yeah. So I felt pretty confident about that one at the time.
We didn't think about key back then, so we'd write a song instrumentally just based on where it sounded best on a guitar. So occasionally that creates some problems, because all of a sudden he realizes like, oh shit, I can't actually sing these notes where they're supposed to be. And, we just got like so profoundly lucky with The House I Haven't Built, where is just right at the tippy top of his range, and he can just barely hit it.
That was like one of the last overdubs we did. We tried like, slowing it down to do it. We tried like lowering the pitch. Like it's right on the cusp of it. And we tried recording it so many different ways just to get it to feel as a bright and anthemic and exciting as possible. It's actually like an old, it's a Daniel Lanois trick that he's a Canadian producer who produced like U2's biggest records. Like I'm pretty sure he did the Joshua Tree. And that was like one of the tricks was like adjust the song's pitch to be as high as it could possibly be, but not too high. So that way Bono is always soaring, And although like, I don't know if Japandroids are quite as soaring as U2 gets, they're soaring in a fast, more bombastic way.
There's a certain emotional factor that you can only get, I think, when it sounds like he's actually like struggling to hit those notes. There's something about that really brings out this like desperation and like it really helps that feeling of like urgency really come out. So to some extent that was like sheer dumb luck, and that's just where the song was written. But I think there was also this element of like, no, like you can hit those notes, it's going to be a struggle, but like you can hit those notes, and when you do, it's going to be really special. Made it a bitch to play on live though, for sure, because it's hard for him to hit those notes night after night.
I settled in slowly to this house that you call home. To blood and breath, fair flesh and flesh of our bodies in the heat of the night. All day, the day after, red in the skies.
Yeah, obviously a calling card for our band is the big backup vocals and all the gang vocals. So for almost every song, but I think this one was one that we really wanted to dial in and make sure that we really nailed it, because we could really tell like this is going to be something people are going to want to sing along to. I think this, and then obviously that bridge in Nights of Wine and Roses are sort of two big moments where you really want the crowd to know they're supposed to sing there. Once we started touring on Post Nothing, we really noticed those moments where people wanted to sing along. And so I think there was definitely a bit more of a conscious effort for this record of being like, okay, let's like figure out a way to like get the crowd to sing along to this part. How do we get the crowd to sing along to this part? And there was definitely a lot more of those like very clear kind of cues that we did. One of the like real like producer moments for Jesse is on that song. So, when he sings, "You're not mine to die for anymore, so I must live." That's when the vocal of the oh should come back in. And Jesse was like, "No, dude, we don't have it there. We just let that space be there. It gives a chance for the crowd to sing it whenever you guys play it live." And I really like that sense of space there. I think it's really cool, and it just like makes the song explode that last time.
It's a lifeless life with no fixed address to give. But you're not mine to die for anymore, so I must live. Born of a bottle from heaven's hand, and now you know, and here I am.
The crowd is sort of this really important part of our show, like it's very participatory, right? Like we're not looking to do a thing where like everybody in the crowd's supposed to like sit down and watch us perform a show for them. It's very much like a communal thing that we're all a part of, and we really wanted to like integrate that and kind of like bring that into this next record to really kind of keep building on that. So yeah, having all those big gang vocals was a huge part of creating that sort of an atmosphere.
One of the really fun things about Celebration Rock is that it does feel like hanging out with your friends. There's so many bands, so many great bands where you feel like the band members don't hang out, like when they're not playing together. But with Japandroids, you do feel like, these two are like best friends and they're having a great time. And they're inviting you as the listener to, be the third wheel. They're like, hey man, hang out with us. We're going to have a great time. And, you might be alone right now listening to this, but if you put this record on, you're not going to be alone. We're going to be with you for the next 40 minutes and it's going to be a great time. And like all of the great rock records, it is like a companion. You feel like I'm hanging out with these guys and they understand me in a way that maybe other people don't. And I can act a certain way when I'm listening to this that maybe I can't act when I'm with other people. And that's, I think, one of the magical things about Celebration Rock.
I certainly didn't have any insight, nor did Brian, that this song was going to be this sort of life-changing song for us. You're just making every song as good as it can be, and you're just hoping, you're hoping people like it, but most of all, you're just hoping you like it. And, with that song, we just made a song that we were really proud of, but we didn't have any idea of how much it was going to change our lives.
It got bigger and bigger and bigger after that moment in time, and nothing is bigger, nothing is more popular in Vancouver than hockey. It's Canada. Like, Canadians love hockey, and the Vancouver Canucks. You don't even have to be into hockey. You still watch, the Canucks. You watch the playoffs, and they would skate out onto the rink to a house that had been built in Vancouver, and it was getting played at the stadium every single week as the local hockey team skated onto the ice. And I know Brian was quite proud because he bought tickets to the hockey game, and he brought his mom, who's a Vancouverite, and he brought her to the game, and she got to hear his song while the team skated on the ice. She's also a big sports fan, from my understanding as well. So I think was quite a look, Mom, I made it moment when the local hockey team is skating to your song onto the ice. I think that was a pretty big deal.
It's wild, to see everybody singing along to your music, and that's the one that just gets obviously the wildest response from a crowd, and that never gets old. I'm never going to get tired of that, ever.
Heart's terrain is never a prairie, but you weren't wearing. You took my hand.
I was excited when I heard this song because you could try to be the fastest band, and bands have done that, and you can try to be the poppiest, hookiest kind of band or whatever, but if you can't do a slow one, you know what I mean? Like, everybody likes a slow one.
Yeah, I think in the same way that like Nights of Wine and Roses is just a total like prototypical first track, I think Continuous Thunder is a prototypical closer. It is a little more subdued in terms of it's not as upbeat as a lot of the songs on the record. It is more introspective. It's slower. I guess you could describe it as a ballad, but it really does feel like a summation type song, like this is what's playing over the closing credits as like the couple kisses under like, a thunderstorm.
Through the cold, pissing rain, dressed to the nines, arm in arm with me tonight, singing out loud, yeah, 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 like continuous thunder.
we started falling into a bit of a pattern of like 7 fast songs, 1 slow song at the end. So Continuous Thunder kind of takes in some of that same space that I Quit Girls had on Post Nothing, to some extent, in the sense that it's, it is slower and it's a little bit more subdued than everything else.
So yeah, writing that song, I was like, oh man, like, I just think it really shows a lot of skill as a songwriter, as a singer, as a drummer as well. Like, I've talked a lot about Brian. I haven't talked as much about Dave. Like, to play a slow, spacious, pocketed drum song amongst a song like Younger Us that's going at 250 BPM or whatever it is. It shows your diversity as a band, and to me it also shows the longevity of the band.
I was very proud of that song when we finished it, not just as a drummer, but I think I was also just proud of our band because it felt like we were really exploring some new territory with that. Whereas, a lot of these songs on Celebration Rock felt like kind of almost like writing like a better version of Young Hearts Spark Fire or Wet Hair or something like that. Like it was kind of in our wheelhouse, but trying to execute that idea better. Continuous Thunder felt a bit more like an exploration of something a little different.
Hearts to rain. It's never a query, but you weren't worried. You took my hand through the cold, pissing rain, dressed in the night, arm in arm with me tonight, singing out loud, yeah, 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 like continuous thunder.
Yeah, again, we were exploring a pretty different way of being a band for that song, and and a huge part of that obviously is the way Brian sings. So, whereas every other song, Brian's kind of just yelling at the top of his lungs, and that's sort of where that emotional resonance comes from. This one was much, much more intimate. So there's a different choice of microphone. There was definitely a different kind of balance in his headphones. He wasn't playing his playback at the top volume so that he had to yell to get over it. It was quieter. Everything about it was just approached with a lot more subtlety. And our band is not known for subtlety, so it was definitely a different approach.
This was actually recorded similar to For the Love of Ivy, where I came up with a vocal sound first. I didn't make Brian record it all, clean and vulnerable and kind of like dry and exposed. I made him comfortable first. I came up with that kind of saturated, blown out sound that he often would use on all those earlier records. Like we'd sometimes use a Sounds amp like for his vocals and stuff like that. That's sort of like a guitar amp simulator. So that way Brian wouldn't feel like himself singing it. He'd feel like he was in the character of the song. And that's a trick I've found over the years. Like if I give him a good headphone mix where he feels cool, then he sings really cool too.
And I don't really remember it being that much of a struggle, honestly, to get that vocal performance. I think Brian had a pretty clear idea of what he wanted to do. I think there is, a fair amount of effects on the vocal just so it doesn't feel too exposed, and finding the right blend where it, sits in the mix so it's not kind of overly vulnerable was a thing. But I think as far as how to sing to that song, I think it was pretty clear that was the way to sing.
Had all of the answers and you had the body you wanted. Would we love with the legendary fire? Oh, and if I had all of the answers and you had the body you wanted, would we love with the legendary fire? And if the cold piss and rain flooded that fire, would you still take my hand tonight? Singing out loud, yeah, 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 like continuous thunder.
It doesn't have the grandiosity of a song like Jungle Land, but it has a similar sort of feeling of being an elegy, like, okay, we've gone on this journey together and we were these young kids at the beginning of the record and now we're at the end and we've changed a little bit. Maybe we've grown up over the course of this journey. And with Continuous Thunder, it's almost like, okay, the heroes are walking off into the sunset, but they're not going to be the same people maybe that they were at the beginning of the record.
I think the real moment when I realized certainly that things were totally changing was we went in May and we did a UK tour right before the album was about to drop, and it was really fun. And but it was kind of like playing a lot of the same type of venues we've been playing on Post Nothing. Small clubs, really great crowds, blah blah blah. And then we went right from that to a big North American tour. And I think the first show of that North American tour was in Seattle at Numos, and it was sold the fuck out, like so sold out, like so many people. And basically every show on that tour was like that. It was just like fucking rammed with people, and people already knew, like all the new songs, even though the album had like just dropped. And that's when it was like, okay, this is something totally different is about to happen here. It's not really till you are playing in front of people that you really see kind of how much of a hold the album already has on people. And it was definitely like that first tour of North America was just like, oh wow, this is a big deal. People are really excited, and this is going to change our lives.
I think when you capture kind of a band at a time when they're playing live an incredible amount, there's touring, like they toured for 2.5 years straight. They did like 4,000 shows or something. Like they played in 70 countries or something obscene like that. Like to capture that energy, like you can sit around in your house and write great songs, and people do, and you have to do that at a certain time as a songwriter. But those songs were written on tour in a completely whirlwind time in their lives. And there's a bit of kind of like, divine intervention that kind of creates this energy at that time and this momentum that they were able to capture. And I was lucky enough to get to record.
Celebration Rock, I think we had a pretty clear idea of how we could improve on what we did with Post Nothing. And then I think after Celebration Rock, that path became a little less clear to us. I think obviously there's only the two of us in the band, so your options as far as like where you can go musically are more limited. And so, yeah, I think it's no surprise that it took quite a long time to make the next record, partly because we toured our asses off and we were gone for like 2 years touring on Celebration Rock, and then we're exhausted after that. But I think also, the shadow of Celebration Rock looms pretty large over our band, for, mostly for good. But the flip side of that is, yeah, like there's definitely moments where, on Near the Wild Heart of Life for us, where we would be working on a song and we'd be like, maybe this sounds a little too much like Japandroids, and that wasn't something that ever occurred to us on Celebration Rock. But it is a funny thing where it's and it's not necessarily just about Celebration Rock itself, but as your band progresses and as you keep going, like I think there's a certain need to feel like you're challenging yourself and exploring new territory. So it's an interesting thing, right? Where there's probably a whole bunch of people that would just wanted a Celebration Rock Part 2 and then Celebration Rock Part 3, Part 4, and so on and so forth. But that wasn't necessarily something we were interested in doing.
The problem with Japandroids is that when you make a record that recreates the feeling of falling in love for the first time, you can only fall in love for the first time once, So if that's what people want from you, how do you do that on your next record? I think it's really hard to do. I think it remains to be seen with Japandroids just because they haven't put out a whole lot of music since Celebration Rock. Like I would be hard pressed to say they're never going to make a record as good as that because they've only made one record since then. I do know that like if they don't make another record at all, or they don't make a record as good as Celebration Rock, that I don't think it really matters. Celebration Rock to me is like one of those albums that like you can't replicate. They made this record and you can't take that away from them. And maybe that's enough.
You're not going to write Celebration Rock twice, and not like we're even trying to, or that Japandroids are trying to do that necessarily, but we always think about Celebration Rock. We always think about, what makes that record great. We always consider it. We listen to it sometimes, like in the studio, we think about it, but at least I do. But that song is shows that it's not a one-trick pony band. Like Japandroids do slower, weirder, moodier shit, and they've written a lot of stuff since then where they've done that. And I think that Continuous Thunder makes that kind of okay, like it's not really out of their wheelhouse. And for sure, like Near to the Wild Heart of Life goes farther away from that at times, and also set them up for the fact that Japandroids have been a band for 10 more years since Celebration Rock and are still touring and have written tons of new songs, which are not out yet, but will exist one day. And they're still a relevant band. So that song to me is the gateway to the rest of their career.
I think the overwhelming feeling I have when I look back on this record is just gratitude. You know, I can still remember being the dude who was just playing drums in a local Vancouver band and wondering if I was ever gonna, get to go on a proper tour and if anybody outside of Vancouver was ever gonna really hear our songs. I have a lot of friends who are amazingly talented musicians and who have made fantastic albums, and their work hasn't been recognized in the same way, on the same level. And as much as I think we're a good band and like our songs very much and think we put on a good show, I'm also acutely aware of how much luck and timing is a factor in success, and overall, I just feel so lucky, that I got to make a record that I'm really proud of, that means so much to people. It's a pretty amazing thing to be part of.
Visit lifeoftherecord.com for more information about Japandroids. You'll also find a link to stream or purchase Celebration Rock. Thanks for listening.